Ambassador Alara Vance stood at the viewport of her private chambers aboard the United Terran Confederacy Embassy Station, watching the gleaming spires of the Galactic Council headquarters shimmer against the backdrop of an alien sun. After 30 years of service as UTC's lead diplomat, she felt every day of those decades weighing on her shoulders. The station's artificial gravity seemed particularly heavy today, or perhaps it was just the burden of what was to come. Her reflection stared back at her from the reinforced glass, silver streaks through once dark hair, lines etched around eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of countless treaties, alliances, and promises. Eyes that had seen humanity consistently extend its hand in friendship, only to be met with suspicion, ingratitude, and increasingly, outright hostility. Ambassador, her aide, Marcus Teller, appeared in the doorway. The emergency communication from Earth has arrived. President Adeyemi is waiting. Vance nodded and followed him to the secure communication room. The holographic projection of Earth's leader appeared before her, flanked by the UTC's Joint Chiefs and colonial representatives. Alara, President Adeyemi's voice was grave. The Confederacy Council has reached a unanimous decision. The insult cannot stand. Understand, Madam President. Vance's voice was steady, though her heart raced. This moment had been decades in the making, yet somehow still felt sudden. The directive is clear. I'll deliver our message to the Council within the hour. After the transmission ended, Vance sat alone in the dimmed room, reflecting on the events that had led to this watershed moment. The UTC had been a cornerstone of galactic stability for over a century, often operating as the peacekeeper, innovator, and mediator within a council composed of species with ancient grudges and incompatible worldviews. The Xylosians, with their hive mind approach to governance, could never fully understand the Bralaxi individualists. The methane-breathing Thonar could not physically occupy the same spaces as the oxygen-dependent majority. The militant Drekini still harbored ancestral hatred for the philosophical Atraxi. Yet somehow, humans had managed to bridge these divides, creating technologies that allowed different species to coexist, developing diplomatic frameworks that transformed ancient enemies into reluctant trading partners. And yet, despite all this, respect and gratitude had been in short supply. 3 months ago, a devastating ion storm had ravaged the Bralaxi homeworld's largest continent. UTC emergency response teams were the first to arrive, bringing life-saving technology and expertise. Within days, they'd established clean water systems, field hospitals, and temporary shelters for millions. The Bralaxi High Command's response? A formal complaint to the Council about cultural contamination and unwelcome human influence on survivor psychology. 2 weeks later, UTC medical researchers announced a breakthrough treatment for cascading cellular degradation, a disease that had plagued the Thonar for generations. Rather than gratitude, the response was suspicion and accusations of biological dominant strategy and theories that humans were creating dependencies on Terran medicine. The final straw had come just 5 days ago. A critical malfunction in the Atraxi Central Atmospheric Processing Complex threatened to poison an entire city dome. UTC engineers, already on site for a collaborative project, worked for 36 hours straight to prevent catastrophe. Their reward? Being escorted off the planet under guard, accused of deliberately modifying systems to require human maintenance expertise and creating technological subjugation. Now, as Vance prepared to enter the Galactic Council chamber one last time, she steeled herself against the barrage of accusations and suspicions that had become the standard response to human presence in galactic affairs. The Grand Chamber fell silent as she entered. 217 species represented, all watching the human diplomat with expressions ranging from smug satisfaction to uneasy anticipation. Ambassador Trell of the Drekini hegemony, leader of the anti-human coalition, stood at the central podium, still basking in his latest victory. The resolution has passed with an overwhelming majority, he was saying, mandibles clicking in what passed for satisfaction among his kind. The United Terran Confederacy will submit to trade restrictions and technological supervision to ensure galactic equity. The humans' disproportionate influence will finally be. Ambassador Krell, Vance's voice cut through the chamber like a plasma beam. I come before this council not to debate your resolution, but to inform you of ours. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as Vance took her position at the speaker's platform. The chamber's acoustics carried her clear, unwavering voice to every corner. For 142 standard years, humanity has served as this council's problem solver, peacekeeper, innovator, and mediator. We have bled for your conflicts, spent our resources on your crises, and shared our advancement for the betterment of all species. She activated a holographic display, showing UTC ships delivering aid to disaster zones across multiple worlds, human doctors treating alien children, engineers rebuilding devastated infrastructure. In return, we have received suspicion, ingratitude, and now, this final insult. She gestured toward the resolution text still floating above Trell's podium. Therefore, as of this moment, by unanimous decision of the United Terran Confederacy Council and Colonial Assembly, humanity formally and permanently withdraws from the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted in chaos. Ambassador Trell's translator struggled to keep up with his rapid clicking speech. This is merely a negotiating tactic. You cannot simply. This is not a negotiation, Vance continued, her voice amplified to cut through the pandemonium. All treaties, trade agreements, defense pacts, and technological exchange programs between the UTC and Council members are hereby null and void. All UTC personnel, military, scientific, medical, and diplomatic, will immediately withdraw from Council space. The shouting grew louder. Ambassador Zoteril of the Atraxi rose, his crystalline form catching the light. Ambassador Vance, surely we can discuss. There is nothing to discuss. The time for discussion was before you voted to treat us as subjects rather than partners. Vance's eyes swept the chamber one last time. You have made your choice. Now you will live with it. With that, she turned and walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, ignoring the cacophony of protests and demands behind her. Outside, her staff waited with solemn expressions. They all understood the magnitude of what had just transpired. Send the signal, she told Marcus. Commence the Great Withdrawal. Within hours, the most massive logistical operation in human history began. UTC flag vessels throughout Council space received priority orders to cease all current operations and prepare for immediate departure. Military outposts initiated evacuation protocols. Research stations began securing sensitive data and equipment. Medical facilities started transferring patients to local care providers where possible. On the Xylosian colony world of Nexus 7, Dr. Kiran Shah was in the middle of explaining a complex surgical procedure to his alien counterparts when his neural implant chimed with a coded withdrawal alert. He stopped mid-sentence, looked at the eager faces around him, and made a quick decision. He transferred his complete surgical manual to the local medical database before quietly excusing himself, the last gift he could offer. Aboard the Galactic Council Security Station Epsilon, Fleet Commander Natasha Kuznetsova received the order while overseeing patrol deployments along a contested border region. Without explanation, she recalled all UTC vessels, leaving her stunned alien colleagues to fill the sudden security vacuum. At the Multi-Species Research Institute on Harmonious Accord, Dr. Tariq Ghazali and his team were on the verge of a breakthrough in anti-gravitational field manipulation. When the recall came, they systematically destroyed their research notes and prototypes rather than leave them in Council hands, erasing years of work in minutes. Across Council space, the pattern repeated thousands of times over. Human presence, expertise, and influence withdrawn like a receding tide. The initial response from Council leadership was disbelief and dismissal. A theatrical gesture, Ambassador Trell declared to news networks. The humans are too integrated into galactic affairs to actually withdraw. They'll return when they realize the consequences to their own economy. By the third day, when over 40% of UTC ships and personnel had already departed Council space. The tone changed dramatically. Emergency sessions were called. Diplomatic envoys were dispatched to Earth. Trade incentives and concessions were hastily drafted. The anti-human coalition fractured as former allies turned on Trell and his supporters, blaming them for miscalculating humanity's response. "We must offer meaningful concessions," urged Ambassador Zoteril of the Atraxi in a closed session. "The withdrawal is already affecting critical systems across multiple sectors." "They're bluffing," Trell insisted, though with less conviction. No species would sacrifice their position in the galactic community over a simple regulatory resolution. But humans were doing exactly that. By the end of the second week, 70% of UTC citizens and assets had been evacuated from Council space. The effects were becoming impossible to ignore. The first major crisis erupted at the central transit hub in the Proximus sector. With human traffic controllers and maintenance crews gone, the automated systems, designed and regularly updated by UTC engineers, began to falter under the strain of compensating for their absence. Minor navigational errors escalated into near collisions. When a Drekini freighter actually did collide with a Chthonar passenger vessel, there were no human emergency response teams to coordinate the rescue effort. 17 lives were lost. It was just the beginning. On Xylos Prime, Scientist Director Thelzaran stared at the research terminal in despair. The quantum entanglement project she'd co-led with human scientists now sat dormant. The remaining Xylosian researchers simply lacked the expertise to continue without their human counterparts. 5 years of groundbreaking work, potentially the key to instantaneous galactic communication, now stalled indefinitely. "There must be documentation, notes we can follow," she chittered anxiously to her subordinates. But the human researchers had taken their insights with them, leaving only the basic framework behind, technically fulfilling contractual obligations while ensuring the project couldn't advance without them. At Harmony Orbital Port, one of the busiest trading hubs in the galactic core, Administrator Cthon watched in helpless frustration as another ship collision alarm blared. The human-designed traffic management system was increasingly glitchy without regular maintenance from its creators. His hastily trained replacement staff struggled with interfaces designed for human cognition patterns. "Reroute incoming vessels to Auxiliary Dock 7, he ordered, knowing full well that the dock was already over capacity. "And someone contact the Atraxi engineers again. They promised a workaround for the predictive routing module 3 days ago." But the Atraxi engineers had their own crises to manage. The atmosphere processor that UTC engineers had saved before being unceremoniously expelled was showing warning signs again. And this time, there was no one with the specialized knowledge to address them. Perhaps the most heartbreaking scenes unfolded in medical facilities across Council space. On Chthonar Colony 12, Matriarch Dvanna kept vigil beside her bondmate's stasis pod. Xoth had been midway through the treatment protocol for cascading cellular degradation when the human medical team departed. The local physicians had assured her they could continue the treatment, but their uncertainty was poorly concealed. The humans provided the medication formula. One physician had told her, not meeting her compound eyes. But some of the application techniques were proprietary. "We're working to reverse engineer the procedure." 3 days later, Xoth's condition had deteriorated. Dvanna placed a clawed appendage against the transparent stasis field, watching helplessly as the being she had shared 50 cycles with slipped away due to politics she had no influence over. As weeks turned to months, the Galactic Council found itself in an unprecedented position. For over a century, humans had quietly become the connective tissue of interstellar civilization, mediating disputes, providing technological solutions to cross-species problems, offering medical expertise that bridged different biologies. Now that tissue was torn away, leaving exposed the fragility of a cooperative system built on species that had evolved on different worlds, with different values, perceptions, and needs. 6 months into the Great Withdrawal, the first economic systems began to collapse. Trade routes that relied on human security escorts became too dangerous to traverse as space piracy surged. Complex supply chains fractured without human logistics coordinators. Resources previously abundant through human mining colonies and manufacturing centers grew scarce and prohibitively expensive. One standard year after Ambassador Vance's departure from the council chamber, the situation had deteriorated beyond anyone's darkest predictions. The Galactic Council itself had devolved into a shouting match of recriminations and blame. Sessions that once debated lofty principles of interstellar governance now focused on desperate measures to prevent complete societal breakdown. The anti-human coalition had been formally dissolved, its leaders removed from positions of influence. In Trell's case, quite literally, as the Drekini hegemony had recalled and imprisoned him for catastrophic diplomatic malpractice. Multiple council species were now experiencing technological regression as systems they had come to rely on, but never fully understood, began to fail without human maintenance. Medical crises erupted as treatments developed by human researchers became unusable without their expertise. Ancient conflicts, long suppressed by human-brokered peace treaties, reignited as desperate species sought advantages in a destabilizing galaxy. The most alarming development came from the fringes of council space. Taking advantage of the security vacuum left by the withdrawal of UTC patrol fleets, pirate coalitions and militant separatist groups began carving out territories. Some reports suggested they were forming their own governance structures, brutal and exploitative shadow states beyond council authority. Faced with this existential crisis, the Galactic Council finally did what it should have done a year earlier. It voted unanimously to send a high-level delegation to UTC space with a formal apology and an offer of unprecedented concessions to entice humanity's return. The delegation, led by the newly appointed Council High Speaker Zoteril, carried with them the authority to offer humanity a permanent veto position on the Council, exemption from any form of external regulation, and reparations for the insult of the original resolution. They traveled in the Council's grandest diplomatic vessel, projecting confidence but harboring private dread. After a tense journey through what used to be neutral space, now patrolled by formidable UTC warships, they arrived at the edge of human-controlled territory. For 3 days, they waited, transmitting their request for diplomatic reception. When a response finally came, it was not the welcome they had hoped for, but permission for a single shuttle carrying only Zoteril himself to proceed to New Terra Station. The station that greeted the Atraxi diplomat bore little resemblance to UTC facilities he remembered. It was larger, more advanced, with unfamiliar technologies evident even to his untrained eye. The human security personnel who escorted him moved with confidence and purpose, their expressions neither hostile nor welcoming, simply indifferent. He was brought to a conference room where Ambassador Vance waited. She had changed little in appearance, but sat with the gravitas of someone whose warnings had been vindicated in the most tragic way possible. "High Speaker Zoteril," she acknowledged him. "I must admit, we did not expect the Council to wait an entire year before making this overture." Ambassador Vance. His translator conveyed his formal tones. "On behalf of all Council species, I come bearing a formal apology for the grave misjudgment of our previous actions and an offer of—" "Save your diplomatic language, Zoteril," Vance interrupted, her voice weary rather than angry. "Let's speak plainly. You're here because everything is falling apart without us." The crystalline being's internal lights dimmed slightly, the Atraxi equivalent of a pained expression. "The situation is challenging. Challenging." Vance's laugh held no humor. "We've received reports of famine on 3 core worlds. The Proxima Transit Hub has been abandoned due to critical systems failure. There are rumors of armed conflict between the Drekini and Chthanar over resource shortages." "All true," Zoteril acknowledged, "which is why the Council is prepared to offer unprecedented concessions." He transmitted the formal offer to her terminal. "We recognize now the essential role humanity played in maintaining galactic stability and prosperity. Vance glanced at the document without reading it, then met the alien diplomat's gaze directly. You misunderstand the situation, High Speaker. This meeting isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy, a chance to explain why we will not be returning. She activated a holographic display showing various metrics of human development since the withdrawal. Energy production up 32%. Colonial expansion accelerated by 400%. Medical breakthroughs doubled. Manufacturing efficiency increased by 27%. Military capacity enhanced by 60%. For over a century, we devoted immense resources to solving the galaxy's problems, Vance continued. Now, those resources are focused entirely on our own advancement. We have no desire to return to a role where our efforts are met with suspicion and ingratitude. But surely the suffering of innocent beings, Zotero began, is the consequence of their leaders' choices, Vance finished firmly. The same leaders who were content to benefit from our contributions while treating us as a threat to be contained. She stood, signaling the meeting's end. The United Terran Confederacy wishes the Council species peace and prosperity, Zotero. But we will build our future independently. Your shuttle has been cleared for return. The message was clear, and within hours, the rejection of the Council's offer was made official. Humanity would not be returning to save a galaxy that had never truly valued its contributions. In the 5 years that followed, the divide between human and Council space grew ever more pronounced. The United Terran Confederacy experienced what historians would later call the Great Acceleration, an unprecedented period of development and expansion. Freed from the constraints of accommodating alien biologies, technologies, and perspectives, human innovation flourished in directions optimized solely for human needs and capabilities. Energy research that had been limited by Council safety protocols now produced micro-singularity power sources that made energy concerns obsolete on human worlds. Medical science, focused exclusively on human physiology, extended average lifespans by decades within years of the withdrawal. Quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology all advanced at rates that would have been impossible under Council restrictions. The UTC expanded its territory aggressively, establishing colonies in previously unexplored regions. Advanced terraforming techniques transformed marginal worlds into paradises tailored to human preferences. Massive habitat stations housed millions in comfort around gas giants and mineral-rich asteroids. The population boom that followed the withdrawal created a demographic surge that fueled further expansion. Military development, once constrained by Council arms limitations, produced defense systems that made UTC space virtually impenetrable. Automated defense platforms created buffer zones around human territory. The UTC Space Force, reorganized and expanded, patrolled these borders with ships incorporating technologies that would have been deemed too destabilizing under Council treaties. Perhaps most significantly, the psychological character of humanity transformed. The generation that grew up after the withdrawal had no memory of humans as galactic caretakers. They were raised on stories of Council ingratitude and the prosperity that followed independence. Schools taught the Great Withdrawal as humanity's liberation from ungrateful aliens who had exploited human generosity while fearing human potential. Popular entertainment romanticized the self-sufficient human spirit and portrayed the decision to leave Council space as the beginning of a golden age. Public opinion surveys showed overwhelming support for maintaining separation, with only a small minority advocating for even limited re-engagement with Council species. Political candidates who suggested reconsidering relations with the former galactic community found themselves swiftly voted out of office. Meanwhile, beyond the heavily guarded borders of UTC space, the situation continued to deteriorate. Without the technological, medical, and diplomatic infrastructure the humans had provided, the Galactic Council struggled to maintain even basic interstellar governance. Hyperspace travel, once routine, became increasingly hazardous as navigation systems degraded and safety protocols became impossible to maintain. Several major transit routes had been abandoned entirely after catastrophic accidents. Trade between distant species declined to levels not seen since before first contact with humans. Some outlying worlds, cut off from regular supply shipments, had reverted to pre-space technology levels just to survive. Medical crises stretched limited resources to breaking points. Diseases once controlled by human-developed treatments resurged with devastating effect. Life expectancy decreased across multiple species as advanced treatments became unavailable or unreliable. Most concerning were the reports of political fragmentation. Several major species had withdrawn from the Council to focus on their own survival. Others had formed exclusionary alliances, protecting resources from outside demands. The Grand Chamber that had once housed representatives from over 200 species now rarely saw more than 50 in attendance. Occasionally, refugee ships from Council space would appear at UTC borders, carrying desperate beings seeking sanctuary. UTC border policy permitted limited humanitarian admission after extensive security screening. These refugees brought stories of collapse, conflict, and suffering that reinforced humanity's conviction that separation had been the right choice. One such refugee, a young Xylosian scientist named Vreltaz, who had studied under human mentors before the withdrawal, established a small but vocal foundation advocating for limited humanitarian intervention. "We have a moral obligation to help," she argued in public forums, "not to govern or dictate, but to alleviate suffering caused by the absence of technologies only humans understand." Her arguments gained some sympathy, but little traction against the prevailing sentiment that the Council species had made their choice and must live with the consequences. Government officials politely acknowledged her humanitarian concerns while firmly maintaining the separation policy. 27 years after the Great Withdrawal, humanity had built a civilization that few would have imagined possible under the limitations of Council membership. The UTC now comprised over 200 colony worlds and thousands of space habitats across multiple star systems. The population had tripled. Virtual immortality through consciousness transfer was becoming available to the average citizen. The first exploratory missions to neighboring galaxies were in preparation. It was against this backdrop of human flourishing and alien decline that an unexpected signal reached the communications array at UTC Border Station Sentinel-17. The transmission was weak, degraded by distance and interference, using an outdated UTC protocol that hadn't been standard for over a decade. The AI monitoring system flagged it as anomalous, and a human communications officer named Maya Okafor made the decision to attempt recovery and translation. What emerged after extensive processing was a message from what remained of the Galactic Council, a final communication before the complete collapse of their interstellar governance system. The message had been traveling for nearly 2 years, routed through a series of increasingly unreliable relay stations. Its contents were grim. A power vacuum in former Council space had been filled by a militant alliance calling themselves the Ascendancy, a coalition of previously minor species who had reverse-engineered abandoned human weapons technology and combined it with their own aggressive expansionist ideology. They were systematically conquering former Council worlds, imposing brutal subjugation on the inhabitants. The message ended with what could only be described as a plea. "We acknowledge our historical failure to value humanity's contributions. We recognize now, too late, that the stability you provided was not dominance, but necessary stewardship. If any remnant of goodwill toward other sentient beings remains in human hearts, we ask not for salvation for ourselves, but mercy for the billions of innocent lives who never supported our foolish policies and now face extinction or enslavement." The message was forwarded up the chain of command until it reached the highest levels of UTC government. President Callista Chun called an emergency session of the Confederacy Council to address what some are already calling the final appeal. The debate was intense. Some argued that the Ascendancy could eventually become a threat to human space and should be neutralized preemptively. Others maintained that any involvement in affairs beyond their borders would inevitably draw humans back into the thankless role they had escaped. Humanitarian advocates pushed for a limited rescue operation to extract endangered populations, while isolationists insisted that not a single human life should be risked for species that had rejected human partnership. After 3 days of deliberation, President Chun addressed the citizens of the UTC in a solemn broadcast. 27 years ago, humanity made the difficult but necessary decision to chart our own course among the stars, separate from a galactic community that valued our contributions but feared our potential. That decision has led to unprecedented prosperity and advancement for our species. We have built something remarkable, a civilization designed by humans, for humans, answerable only to human values and aspirations. She paused, her expression grave. Now, those we left behind face extinction at the hands of conquerors who have perverted human technology for purposes of domination. They have asked for our help, not as subordinates seeking masters, but as one sentient species appealing to another in their darkest hour. The silence stretched for a moment before she continued. After careful consideration of all strategic, ethical, and historical factors, the Confederacy Council has decided that the United Terran Confederacy will acknowledge receipt of this message and express our regret for the suffering of innocent beings. However, we cannot and will not intervene in conflicts beyond our borders. The lesson of our past relationship with the Galactic Council was clear. When humans solve other species' problems, we become not partners but tools, expected to bear burdens without authority, to give without reciprocation, to preserve a system that fundamentally undervalued us. Her voice softened slightly. To those who may feel we are abandoning our moral responsibility, I remind you that our first responsibility is to humanity's future. We will continue our policy of accepting carefully screened refugees, providing them safe haven within our borders. But we will not sacrifice what we have built or risk human lives in conflicts that are not our own. The response was transmitted back along the same route the plea had traveled, though few in UTC leadership believed it would ever reach its intended recipients. The encoded message was simple. We receive your transmission. We regret the suffering of innocent beings caught in this conflict. The United Terran Confederacy cannot intervene in matters beyond our borders. Our refugee protocols remain in effect for those who can reach our territory. We wish you peace. With that final communication, humanity turned its attention back to its own boundless future. The next month, the first long-range explorer vessel, UTC Horizon, departed for the nearest neighboring galaxy, carrying the best and brightest of Earth's children toward new discoveries and possibilities. As it disappeared into the depths of intergalactic space, few of its crew spared a thought for the dying embers of the civilization their ancestors had once helped build and then, when pushed too far, allowed to crumble. Behind them, in the vast darkness between the stars, the consequences of ancient pride and recent abandonment continued to unfold. A lesson written in the suffering of billions, a monument to the principle that some mistakes cannot be undone, some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, and some opportunities, once squandered, are lost forever. It was simply too late to fix it,